The College Football Playoff Committee released their first rankings last night. There were some surprises, others kind of the obvious. So I'm going to read off these rankings. Now comment below if you think that these rankings are pretty fair or if there's probably some bias in there or if they got it completely wrong. And I will announce my opinions at the end. So number one, they obviously put Alabama because really 11 out of 10 people would. Because Alabama's done everything all season. They've just dominated each and every opponent. I mean, they beat USC when they were number 20, 52-6. Ole Miss was their closest game of the year, but they were down 24-3 in that game, but came back to win by 5. They dominated Arkansas on the road and Tennessee on the road, and they dominated against Texas A&M. And they go on the road against LSU this week. However, at the end of the year, on the 26th of November, they play number 9 Auburn in the Iron Bowl. Now, if they can handle LSU and Auburn, they should be a lock for the College Football Playoff. Because Mississippi State this year on the 12th. Mississippi State has struggled this year. In Chattanooga, they're usually going to beat them. At number 2, they put Clemson. And at number 3, they put Michigan. Now, there were some mixed feelings about this. Others thought Clemson should be number 2, and others thought Michigan should be number 2. But let's look at their schedules. I mean, Clemson opened up the season only a 6-point victory against Auburn, who's now number 9. And I made a mistake earlier in the week. I did say that Louisville only lost to Clemson by 2, but I was incorrect. It was actually by 6. So they beat Louisville at home by 6. And their biggest win of the season was last week against Florida State when they won by 3. And Clemson is going to be theoretically favored in each of their games throughout the rest of the year. At home versus Syracuse, at home versus Pittsburgh, on the road against Wake Forest, and at home versus South Carolina. So you would imagine they would handle these last 4 games. And basically they'd be a heavy favorite whoever came out of the ACC Coastal, whether it's North Carolina or Virginia Tech. It's looking like it's going to be one of those two. Now let's look at Michigan's. Michigan has just theoretically dominated opponents, except for Wisconsin. That was the only opponent they did not dominate, but that was when Wisconsin was number 8, 14-7. Now that is their closest game of the year, but it's a pretty convincing victory. So they dominated their opponent 63-3, 51-14, 45-28 against the Colorado team. However, they were down most of the first quarter and most of the second. They dominated Penn State 49-10, who we'll get to in a little bit. So basically they have dominating wins over Colorado and Penn State, who are now in the rankings. And they beat Wisconsin. So Michigan has just the amount of convincing wins as Clemson does. At number 4, they put Texas A&M. But let's just look at what Texas A&M's done. They started off the year pulling off an upset against UCLA when they were 16. But UCLA struggled ever since then. On the road against Auburn by 13, a 13-point victory. A 21-point victory against then 17 Arkansas. Then a 7-point victory in double overtime versus Tennessee. And their one loss is, of course, the 19-point loss to Alabama. So if Texas A&M keep this up, all it looks like they may have to do is just beat LSU. And they get LSU at home this year. I think Ole Miss will give them trouble as well. In fact, maybe even going on the road in Starkville will give them trouble a little bit. So there's still 3 tough games off of Texas A&M. So don't put them in yet. I'll even say that myself. Number 5, they put the undefeated Washington. However, their more convincing victories this year was the 44-6 victory over Stanford when they were number 7. But Stanford has not done well ever since that. And last week at number 17, Utah, the 7-point victory. But they still have tough games left on the road at Cal this week. They have USC at home this year, but that could be a trap game depending on how you look at it. And on Black Friday at number 25, Washington State. At number 6, they put Ohio State, whose one loss is a 3-point loss to Penn State, where the special team struggled. Number 7, Louisville, who lost by 6 to Clemson, we talked about earlier. Number 8 and number 9, the two lost teams, Wisconsin and Auburn. Wisconsin's two losses are Michigan and Ohio State. Auburn's two losses, Clemson and Texas A&M, who are in the top 4. Number 10, Nebraska, whose one loss was the 6-point overtime loss against Wisconsin. Florida, the 6th one, with their one loss being the 10-point loss on the road at Tennessee. The number 12, Penn State, who we talked about earlier, who did beat Ohio State, but they also lost a heartbreaking 3-point game on the road against Pittsburgh, and they got smoked 49-10 against Michigan in the Big House. Number 13, LSU, whose two losses were a 2-point loss against Wisconsin in Week 1 and a kind of a controversial 5-point loss on the road against Auburn. 14, the two loss, 14-15, both 14-15-16, two lost teams, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Utah, all back-to-back-to-back. Oklahoma, their two losses, a 10-point loss to a now unranked Houston, and a 21-point loss against Ohio State. Number 15, Colorado. Their two losses are to an unranked USC team on the road, 21-17, and the 45-28 loss against Michigan in the Big House, but they were ahead throughout most of the first half. 17, Baylor, who lost to Texas last week by 2 points. 18, Oklahoma State, the 6-2, where their losses are an 11-point loss at Baylor when they were 16th in the country, and that 3-point loss against Central Michigan, where they really should have won that game, and they really need to think about giving them that win back. All right, 19, Virginia Tech. Their two losses are the 45-24 loss against Tennessee and the upset loss of 31-17 on the road against Syracuse. They were heavily favored in that game. All right, 20, West Virginia, whose one loss was last week, 17-point loss to Oklahoma State. 21, North Carolina. Their two losses was the opening weekend, 33-24 against Georgia, and the 34-3 loss against Virginia Tech a couple of weeks ago, which the field was kind of sloppy as the Hurricane Matthew. However, they did beat Miami on the road when they were 16th, 20-13. And North Carolina can still have a chance to win the ACC title game. Number 22, the 3-loss Florida State team. They're pretty much out of it. In their 3 losses was the 7-point loss against Clemson, which maybe could have gone differently, whether if that chop block or the clipping penalty on that huge Dalvin Cook run would have counted or not. And they got humiliated against Louisville in Week 3, and that heartbreaker against North Carolina, losing on a last-second field goal right after a 15-yard penalty. 23, Western Michigan, 8-0, one of the 5 undefeated teams left in college football. But unfortunately, due to the lack of tough opponents, Western Michigan will not be in the college football playoff this year. However, they are still the favorite to have that New Year's 6 bid. Chasing them is 7-1 Boise State, whose only loss this year was last week, the 30-28 loss on the road against Wyoming. And rounding out the top 25, Washington State 6-2, where their only losses is the 3-point loss to Boise State in Week 2 and the 3-point loss in Week 1 against Eastern Washington. So Washington State is right now on a 6-game winning streak, and they have home games coming up against Arizona and California, and then they go on the road against Colorado, and they are at home to finish off the regular season versus number 5 Washington, which that could have not only Pac-12 title game is riding on that, but a playoff spot for Washington. Washington State may not be able to get to the college football playoff due to those 2 losses earlier in the year, because one of them was to an FCS team. However, they can play spoiler for the rival. The Apple Cup, that should be a huge one. I can't wait to see that one. So here's now my take. They got it correct on Alabama being number 1. However, Michigan should be number 2 because Michigan is now in a more competitive conference than the ACC is. Clemson's really struggled. They struggled against Troy by only winning by 1 possession. And they struggled against NC State. It took them overtime to get that done. Clemson doesn't know how to win games, though. Kind of like the Florida State back a couple of years ago. When everyone wanted to see them lose, that was back when Florida State had Jameis Winston. They wanted to see them lose so badly they would root for whoever played Florida State that week. Then they'd get ahead in the game. Florida State would always come from behind. That's kind of what Clemson's doing this year. However, being the Texan fan that I am, I do not even envision why they're the number 4 right now. However, it's because that they've played a more convincing, more tougher schedule than Washington has. And plus, they have 4 key wins right now versus UCLA at Auburn, Arkansas, Tennessee. However, UCLA is struggling right now, but that's okay though, because UCLA was number 60 when that happened. And plus, the Pac-12 was not that good this year because Oregon's struggling, Stanford's struggling. The only 2 good teams right now are Washington and Washington State, who they'll play each other. But Washington State is being overlooked due to those 2 losses earlier in the year. So if Washington State didn't lose to Eastern Washington in Week 1, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that Washington State's probably going to be in the top 12 right now if it weren't for that Week 1 loss. And if it weren't for the Week 2 loss either, I mean, even if they would have just lost Week 2 and not Week 1, Washington State probably going to still be in the top 12. Because what I think the committee is doing is they're taking margin of victory seriously. I think that's what's going to happen this year. I think once we get down to the stretch, they're going to take these margins of victories early in the year and they're going to formulate it into the 4 teams that should be in. Because if we end with an undefeated Alabama, undefeated Clemson, undefeated Michigan, let me turn that back on, and undefeated Washington, if we end with those 4 running the table, which they are all capable of doing that, then why do we even have the committee? At least we could ignite a conversation, maybe putting in 8 teams. Because think about it. Let's just say LSU actually does beat Alabama, or Auburn actually beats Alabama. So we knocked out Alabama, which we could be left with undefeated Clemson, undefeated Michigan, and undefeated Washington. But let's just say Washington State upsets Washington. We're left with undefeated Clemson, undefeated Michigan. Well, let's just say Ohio State beats Michigan. Then we're just left with an undefeated Clemson. So Clemson undoubtedly has the easiest possibility of winning out. In fact, the order goes like this. Clemson has the easiest, has the higher probability of ending the year undefeated amongst the 4 unbeatens left that we're at least talking about. And then the second easiest, in my opinion, is Washington. They go on the road against Cal this week, but Cal already upset Utah at home earlier in the year. And Cal upset Texas earlier in the year when they were number 11. So Cal is very capable of pulling off these huge upsets at home. So don't count out these Golden Bears yet. Then the third most probable of running the table is Alabama. And I think Michigan's going to have the hardest. Because what does Michigan have coming up? They go on the road at Iowa next Saturday the 12th. And don't forget, it's prime time. And that is Wilton Spate's first true real road test. That prime time. And then they go on the road in the horseshoe against Ohio State for the Battle of the Victors. Or that huge rivalry game, the Ohio State and Michigan. So Michigan has the hardest to run the table out of all these 4, in my opinion. Because Iowa may not be that good this year, but they're still capable of pulling off some huge upsets. Anyway, I'll talk about it more next week. Anyway, that'll do it. Like, subscribe to the channel, share this with your friends, family, whoever. Follow my Twitter account at JB Talk Sports. Have a good day, everybody. I'll see you next time.